I want to take some time today to talk about some of my pet peeves when it comes to reading comic books. And I'd love to hear from all of you to see if we share those pet peeves or maybe if these are mine and mine alone. But before we jump into my list, I do want to make it just 100% clear that when I say pet peeves, these are things that, yeah, I find them kind of annoying and yeah, they kind of get under my skin. But by no means are these criticisms that ruin a comic book, with the exception of maybe one if it goes too far. But by and large, these are just minor nuisances that I can live with. They are what they are. We'll start off with my first pet peeve, and the reason I'm putting this one first is because there's a good chance this is more of a me problem and less of a comic book problem, but I'll throw it out there just in case it is something that other people experience as well. This is when you're reading a comic and you can't tell two characters apart. This usually happens when you have two characters who already look kind of similar to each other being featured in the same story, especially if these are newer characters, either newer characters in general or newer characters to me specifically, or if these are characters that I don't encounter all that often. Combine that with an artist who maybe has a style that is less detail oriented, or maybe they do some different things with faces or whatever it happens to be. There are definitely moments or panels where I look and I don't know which of the characters is talking or which of the characters is doing some action, and it's a little bit confusing. Now, I can almost always use context clues to pretty quickly figure out who is supposed to be doing what. It doesn't take me too long to figure it out. But there is a slight break in my flow of reading a comic book when that happens, which I do find kind of annoying. Now, the reason I say this might be a me thing is that this sort of thing does happen to me in real life as well, where I kind of, get a little bit confused about who is who. Maybe I have a little bit of face blindness or something like that. I don't know, but if I haven't seen people in a while, I might not be 100% sure who I'm talking to. But I will say this happens way more in comic books than it does in real life, which is why I'm bringing it up in this video. I'm curious, do you have this problem as well, or is it just me that can't seem to keep characters straight? I don't know. Next up, I want to talk about pages where the intended reading sequence is unclear. This usually happens when you have big two-page displays of some sort of big action or something that is going on, where there are a lot of smaller images that make up this big picture of some significant event to the story. There are times where you're reading these and you have all these smaller pieces, and it's just not clear what order they were supposed to happen in. Even sometimes with dialogue, you're not sure what order the things were said in. Now, usually, this isn't the end of the world. You're able to pick up on all those smaller details, and you may not be entirely sure what order they were supposed to be read in, but you can usually come up with your own order that kind of sort of makes a little bit of sense, and then move on from there. No harm, no foul. Not that big of a deal. The best way I can describe it is it's like if you're streaming a video online and there's a blip in your Wi-Fi or something, so for 3 seconds it gets all pixelated and maybe some of the frames are out of order, but then after that you're right back to the show and things are fine. Doesn't really make that big of a difference in the grand scheme of things. This, however, is my point that I was mentioning earlier, where if it goes too far, it can kind of read a comic book reading experience. This is exceedingly rare, and honestly, I can't even remember the last time I came across this. I would have to go way back before I can remember a specific comic, where the entire thing, you just don't know what's going on, where things are just all over the place and very confusing, and maybe it's the author's writing, maybe it's the way the pages are laid out, it's not entirely sure. But if the entire story is like that, that's a problem. But if there's just 1 or 2 pages in the middle that kind of fall into this trap, it's fine, it's whatever. And I will say that usually when this is the case, there's some really impressive art going on. You may not know what order you're supposed to look at that art, but the art is impressive. So you take the good with the bad. That's my second pet peeve. Pages where the intended reading order is unclear. Which brings me to my final pet peeve, at least for this video, which is comic books that reference other titles kind of out of nowhere and only in a tangential fashion. Let me tell you what I mean by that. I'm sure we've all been reading a comic where at some point a character says something, and inside of the speech bubble next to part of what they said is a little asterisk. And if you follow that asterisk to the bottom of the page or the bottom of the panel, there's a little rectangle that is from the authors that says, "For more information, check out issue number 7. Usually it's some little detail from that issue that the character is referencing, and the authors are telling you, you can go back and check this out if you want more information about that. Usually it's nothing too crucial to the story, but especially since some of the quotes are kind of out of left field, had you not read that issue, I can see why they do that, assuming that it is within the same title. If you're reading Superman number 20 and it says, oh, this is a reference to Superman number 16, whatever, that makes sense. I can deal with that. What bugs me is when they reference a totally different title. Let me give you the example that spurred this whole thing. I was reading a Superman comic, or I guess it was Action Comics. I was reading a collected edition from Action Comics, and there was something that happened in that story, I don't want to give away spoilers, that ultimately you only needed to know the end result of what happened in order for the Superman story, the Action Comics story, to move forward. You don't really need to know how it happened, but it is kind of a significant development, so knowing how it happened would be kind of nice. And the way that they tell you about this is little asterisk in one of the speech bubbles that tells you to go check out Suicide Squad number 19, or whatever it happened to be. And the thing is, I've seen this before, but this time it just bugged me because it just felt like such a marketing move where they're tying in this series that's, I've never seen these two titles cross over before, at least not in recent history, especially not within the collected edition that I've been reading. So to all of a sudden have this out of left field reference to a totally different title, it was just kind of annoying. It felt like they were just trying to sell that other title. I wish they could have at least told me a little bit about what happened instead of just being like, oh yeah, go check out this other comic. No, I'm not going to go check out that other comic. Yeah, I'm going to stay a little bit in the dark about what happened. As I said, all I need to know is the end result, and I'll move on with that. It just bugged me though, and I'm sure it bugs other people. So there you have it. Those are 3 of my pet peeves when it comes to reading comics. Let me know, are those your pet peeves as well? Are yours totally different? If they are, let me know down in the comments. I would love to read all of those, and I will see you next time.